Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into something today that, well, it presents a really powerful paradox. It's straight from the executive summary of a new book, Invisible Injury.
Mm-hmm.
Think about athletes, right?
Mm-hmm.
People whose bodies are supposedly trained for, peak strength, top performance.
Yeah.
Yet they're breaking down. And not from big collisions or
Yeah.
tackles, but from forces within. These non-contact injuries, they're everywhere.
Right.
It just makes you stop and ask, what if the way we've been thinking about strength, training for strength, has been, well, fundamentally missing something crucial?
That's exactly it. That's the silent crisis the book really digs into. We're looking at key bits from the executive summary of Invisible Injury by Terence J Hughes.
Okay.
And our mission here really is to pull out the essential understanding for you, to unpack its main arguments and highlight the real standout elements of what the author calls a new gestalt for movement intelligence.
New Gestalt. And the book, it makes a pretty bold claim right off the bat, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
About this silent crisis in how humans develop movement.
It does.
It centers on this critical window. They call it the 514 development gap.
That's what
Well, this is where young people, kids, are getting pushed into really high-demand physical stuff, sports, and activities.
Yeah, intense stuff.
But they're often denied the basic foundational preparatory work their bodies, their nervous systems actually need at that stage.
Exactly. And the consequences of that gap and, the traditional, often kind of piecemeal training approaches that tend to follow, well, they're devastatingly clear in the data the source brings up.
Like what?
Like the fact that a shocking 68% of youth knee injuries are non-contact. 68%.
Wow.
That's the body essentially failing under its own steam, its own coordination or lack thereof. Not because something hit it.
68%. I mean, that statistic alone is just staggering.
It really is. And this leads right into the book's core idea, the invisible injury. Which is, look, it's way more than just the physical tissue damage.
Okay.
It's the neurological, the psychological imprint that gets left behind. The
Yeah.
stuff conventional rehab often just misses.
What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Well, the source points to things like proprioceptive disruption, that inner sense of where your body parts are. That can stay messed up for 2 to 4 years after the physical injury seems healed, after you've been cleared.
2 to 4 years.
Yeah. Or think about the compensatory patterns that get hardwired into the nervous system. The book mentions some athletes, post-injury, showing up to 74% different muscle activation patterns compared to before they got hurt. 74% different.
So wait, you're saying you might look totally fine, fixed on the outside,
Right.
but deep down, your brain and body are still sort of locked in this survival mode, working around a weakness that might not even physically be there anymore.
That's a great way to put it. Exactly. And it creates this thing the book calls the ghost injury.
Ghost injury.
And it's terrifyingly predictive of getting hurt again. The source cites re-injury rates as high as 50% to 87%. Basically, your injury history becomes a strong predictor of future injury, mainly because those invisible layers, they just weren't dealt with.
Okay, and this brings us back to that paradox you mentioned at the start, because it gets even sharper, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The source notes, over 60% of these non-contact injuries happen during training.
Bingo. Not during the actual games or the main event, during the prep.
So the very activities designed to make us stronger, more resilient.
They might actually be contributing to the fragility. It strongly suggests that standard training methods, often very linear, focused on isolated muscles, kind of fragmented.
Yeah, like bodybuilding almost.
Sort of. They might inadvertently be building bodies that are strong in, let's say, specific isolated movements, but fragile as an integrated whole system.
Okay, that paints a pretty bleak picture of how things often are.
Yeah.
So if traditional training is part of the problem and leaves behind this invisible injury, what's the fix? What's the alternative the book proposes?
Right. So the book introduces what it called the revolutionary solution, the Sambia protocol.
Sambia. Okay.
But, and this is really key, it's very careful not to frame this as just, another set of exercises you slap onto what you're already doing.
Right. Not just Program X.
No. It's presented as a complete paradigm shift, a unified movement intelligence system. And crucially for you, the listener, to understand, it's described as a reorganizing lens that makes current methods more effective.
A reorganizing, right?
Yeah. This is the core of that new gestalt. It's about fundamentally changing the approach to how we develop movement itself.
A new gestalt. A whole different way of seeing the body moving. So what are the standout elements of this new perspective, according to the source? What makes it different?
Okay, let's dive into a few key ones. First up is tensegrity.
Tensegrity. Heard that term, but break it down in this context.
Sure. It moves away from seeing the body as just like levers and pulleys, muscles pulling on bones in isolation.
The old mechanical model.
Exactly. Instead, it describes strength as intelligent strength, something that emerges from how tension is distributed and coordinated across the entire system. Think of the body more like living architecture, where load isn't just handled by one part, it's shared.
Ah, okay. So it's less about just making one muscle huge or strong in isolation,
Right.
and more about teaching the whole network how to absorb and manage force smartly.
Precisely. The source puts it beautifully. True strength is not held, it's shared through the system.
Yeah.
A body trained with that idea in mind is just inherently more resilient to those internal forces, the ones causing non-contact injuries. Because stress and impact aren't just stuck in one spot, they're dissipated, managed by the whole structure.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next?
Next, and this is fascinating, is rhythm as a central organizer.
Rhythm. Okay, like music.
Metronomes. Not just that, it goes deeper. The book argues that rhythm isn't just background noise or timing, it's the actual architecture of coordination itself.
The architecture. Wow.
Yeah, so rhythm-based training isn't just about hitting a beat externally, it's about building an internal sense of timing, flow, and sequence. And this apparently can seriously reduce the cognitive load when you're doing complex movements.
Less thinking, more flowing.
Kind of, and it enhances your timing-based error correction. So your body gets better at adapting and self-correcting on the fly, under pressure.
Huh. That completely flips the script on how we usually think about rhythm in training. We see it as an external cue, maybe for pacing.
Right.
But this is saying it's fundamental to the internal timing you need for any skilled, safe movement.
Exactly that. The source really emphasizes this point. Before there is skill, there is timing. Developing that internal temporal precision using rhythm as a tool is presented as this critical building block that's often just missed.
And they could explain why coordination sometimes just falls apart under fatigue or pressure, when those training injuries often happen.
It's the implication that breakdown might be a timing issue, fundamentally.
Okay. Tensegrity, rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
What else is key to this new gestalt?
Then there's behavioral cognitive integration. This aims squarely at that invisible injury we talked about and what the book calls the cognitive rehabilitation gap.
Right, the mental side.
Well, it's more than just mental. It's about actively recalibrating perception, helping the individual actually feel and sense their body accurately again, especially after pain or injury has sort of distorted that map.
Ah, rebuilding that mind-body connection.
Yes, and shifting attention, getting someone away from just fixating on the bad spot towards an awareness of the whole system working together, and crucially, rebuilding confidence, not just by doing endless reps, but through what they call real-world emulation.
Real-world emulation.
Yeah, practicing actual movement challenges, things you'd face in your sport or life, but scaled down appropriately. So you succeed, you rebuild trust in your body's ability to handle complexity.
So it's really acknowledging that things like fear, messed up perception, lack of confidence, they aren't just side effects. They're central parts of the injury state itself.
Absolutely.
And they need direct rehabilitation, just like a torn ligament.
Exactly. And get this, the source cites evidence that psychological readiness to return to activity is 1.8 times more predictive of getting injured again than standard physical tests are.
1.8 times.
Yeah. It just hammers home how critical it is to weave these behavioral and cognitive pieces into any movement development or recovery plan. You can't separate mind and body here.
Wow. Okay. Anything else major?
One more framework piece they mention is the movement wheel. This is presented as the practical organizer for putting all these ideas together.
The movement wheel.
Yeah, it maps out development across different domains like groundwork, upright movement, stuff in the air, and different layers like basic movement, rhythm, cross-lateral patterns, and then activity-specific skill.
Oh, it's a map for integrated training.
Essentially, yes. The whole goal is to build what they call circular movement intelligence.
Circular movement intelligence.
Meaning the ability to adapt fluidly, smoothly, and safely to pretty much any movement challenge in any situation.
Well,
It's the total opposite of being rigid or only good at moving in straight lines. It's about adaptable resilience from all angles.
okay, tensegrity, rhythm, mind-body integration, all organized by this movement wheel. It sounds comprehensive. But is it just theory? Does the source talk about actual results?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's not just theoretical. The source points to some pretty compelling evidence showing real global impact.
Like what kind of numbers?
Well, things like a 61% reduction in growth plate injuries in a UK trial involving young athletes. That's huge for keeping kids safe during those critical development years.
61%. Wow.
Or a 52% reduction in valgus collapse risk, that inward buckling of the knee that's linked to ACL tears and stuff.
Yeah, very common.
Reduced by 52% in a Swedish study, specifically through rhythm-based training.
Just from rhythm training.
According to the source, yes.
Hmm.
And then there are performance boosts, too, like a 22% improvement in sprint times, 31% better agility scores. It even mentions significant cuts in decision latency, basically how fast you perceive and react, improving by 15–30%.
So it's not just preventing injury, it's making people move better, faster, smarter.
That's the claim.
Yeah.
The data suggests that this new gestalt, focusing on building movement intelligence rather than just raw physical capacity, delivers on both fronts. Safety and performance. It's about maybe integrating modern science with some really fundamental principles of movement, perhaps even reclaiming capabilities that our modern, sometimes fragmented training systems have kind of trained out of us.
Okay, so let's try and pull all this together. What's the big takeaway here for you listening right now? It seems to be that this invisible injury, that deep neurological and psychological scar tissue, is real. It's significant, and it's often missed.
Definitely.
And traditional training methods, well, they're often incomplete because they don't fully address this invisible layer or the body's truly integrated tense-school nature.
Right. They treat the symptom, not always the system.
So this Samba New Gestalt offers a fundamentally different approach, an integrated way to build bodies that aren't just strong in parts, but truly resilient, adaptable, intelligent movers. And this applies right across the board, from kids developing to athletes recovering to elite performers looking for an edge.
Exactly. And maybe this leaves us with a thought to ponder, something drawn from the deeper ideas in the source, touching on reconnecting with a kind of inherent wisdom.
Go on.
What if the intelligence we need for robust, adaptable, injury-resistant movement isn't actually something totally external, something you have to bolt on through ever more complex training programs? What if it's something fundamental, something internal that maybe you just need to reconnect with by learning, perhaps, to listen again to your own body's natural rhythm, its inherent structure, its wisdom?
That's a powerful idea to mull over as you think about your own movement, your own training, your own body's potential.